By your perseverance, you will secure your lives. We've heard these words in this Sunday's gospel. In 2009, when I entered the Society of Jesus, I was in my upper 40s. And there were 13 of us entered the Midwest province of the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus. And the novitiate at that time was in Berkeley, Michigan. And there were 13 of us, again, that entered. And in my upper 40s, I was by far the oldest one. And then there was another guy who was just 40, 39 or 40. And then a couple in their mid-30s, and then some in their late 20s, and then a bunch in their early 20s. And so I was by far the oldest novice. And the younger guys were very nice to me. They were very welcoming. They accepted me as among them, and I was nice to them too. And I didn't try to be their father or anything like that. And it worked far better than I thought it would. And but anyway, there was this one day at dinner. There was a young fellow, and he was about 23. One of the younger novices looked across the dinner table at me, and he said to me, "Kevin," he said, "at your age, anything could happen at any time." And he didn't mean that maliciously. He meant it in good humor, and I took it that way, certainly. But as I thought about it over the next week or so, it was, I was beginning to think that, to this young fellow in his early 20s, I must have looked like Methuselah to him. The fact that he would even think of a joke like that, obviously there's some context to that. And so anyway, I let it go, and it was fine. And then maybe over the next week or so, I happened to be reading some theology, and I read this quote by Bernard of Clairvaux. And Bernard of Clairvaux wrote, "Death waits at the door of the elderly and ambushes the young." Death waits at the door of the elderly and ambushes the young. So with that, of course, I went back to, and the next time at dinner, I told my novice brother in front of everybody else, I quoted Bernard of Clairvaux. And it was kind of my way of getting back, but again, all in good humor, but it speaks to a deeper reality that we are all going to die someday, and death can come for any of us at any time. The Lord can call us back, young or old, and that it's important that we're always prepared for that. And so that's, I think, an important point here. And today's readings, we are at the end of the liturgical year. Next week, we're going to celebrate Christ the King, and this will be, we're in the 33rd Sunday of Ordinary Time, so we're getting to the end of the liturgical year. We'll celebrate Christ the King, and then we'll go into Advent. And so our readings are all about the end times, and our readings, they can be scary. It sounds very frightening, and of course, that's what Jesus is talking about here in this gospel, the end times. And his disciples are asking him, well, when is this going to occur? And what signs would there be? And of course, he tells us about persecutions and famines and wars and insurrections and great divisions among peoples. And it sounds very scary and frightening. But he also tells us elsewhere in the gospel that we will not know the day nor the hour when the Son of Man will come. We do not know this, and only the Father knows this. And so, in every generation for the last 2,000 years, people have probably always thought, when are the end times? When is this going to happen? And, when you see these things, and, I can imagine during World War II what people thought then, when there's such chaos, the whole world was at war, and such this death and destruction and horrible things going on. And I can imagine they would think maybe this is the end times. Or possibly like the siege of Stalingrad or something like that, just some awful things that happened. Dropping the bomb on Hiroshima, what the people there must have thought. Are these the end times? And or perhaps during the Great Civil War in the United States here, how awful things were, how divided we were, and how much bloodshed there was and suffering. And people may have thought, well, these are the end times. And so, we don't know when the end times are. During some of the great wars in the Middle Ages, people maybe thought these were the end times. So we don't know. And but more than likely, again, the end times could come tonight. It could come next week. It could come 5 years from now. It could come 100 years from now, 2,000 years from now, 5,000 years from now. We just do not know. More than likely, what we do know, though, is our own end times is at our own death. Our own death, and more than likely, for all of us here in this church, that is likely to occur before the end of the world. Now, we don't know for sure, but likely our own deaths will come before Christ returns. And so we will meet Christ at our own death. And I think for me, certainly, to be focusing on that, I think, is a lot more helpful, to be prepared to meet the Lord. And that's, I think, the big message here is to be prepared to meet the Lord. And how can we do that? How can we best be prepared? And I think being prepared means being in relationship with the Lord and growing in relationship with the Lord. And we see so beautifully in John's Gospel in the 15th chapter, we see this beautiful metaphor of the vine and the branches, where Jesus compares himself to a vine and us to branches. And he tells us that when we are grafted to Jesus, when we abide, and that word abide means a very close relationship. It's not just a casual relationship, but abide is the verb that's used in the Greek, and it is meant to a very close relationship. And that's what the Lord calls us to be in close relationship with him, to bear good fruit with our lives. And when we've fallen away, and we all do, and remember, God calls us not to perfection, but to fidelity, that when we find ourselves, we've drifted away individually or as a society, Jesus is inviting us to come back, to rejoin, and bear good fruit. And Jesus doesn't do this just by saying, all right, come on back again. But with great joy, Jesus welcomes us to be in relationship with him and to bear good fruit with our lives. And of course, we know to do this, there's a cost to this, right? The cost of discipleship. To follow Jesus, to be a Christian in any time is always going to be countercultural. It's going to go against the grain. It's going to have us as Christians bearing witness to the truth of the gospel, to the good news of Jesus Christ, and to help evangelize the world by the way we love God and the way we love one another. This is what Jesus is calling us to do, to help bring the world together and to work against divisions and hatreds and mistrust, but to work for the common good and to work together, to love God, love one another. And this is what Jesus is calling us to do, to have a close relationship with him and to nurture that relationship, and when it falls apart or when it's distanced, to bring it back. And sometimes that requires the sacrament of reconciliation. But whatever it is that's dividing us, individually and as a society, Jesus invites us to come back, join with him, abide with him, bear good fruit. And then whenever we are called, whether we are called at the time when Christ comes again, or more likely at the end of our lives, that we can be ready. The Lord can find us bearing good fruit, loving God, loving one another, and then we have nothing to fear.